Okay, Dominique. Hello everyone, and welcome for this opening of this conference, ICT for Sustainability 2023. So I'm Benoît Commemal, professor at the University of Rennes. I'm also general co-chair of this conference, together with my colleague Gunther Musbacher, professor at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, but also with INRIA chair in France, here in Rennes, in our team, and working together on ICT for sustainability. So we are very happy to welcome all of you. So that's a very incredible room. Welcome to all the international participants of the International Conference on ICT for Sustainability. So welcome in France. Welcome also to all my French colleagues of the French Software Engineering and Programming Languages Days. I'm very happy to welcome all of you, and I'm super happy that we cross-fertilize these two events with some events that are shared, like this morning with Keynote. Thank you very much for the Mireille and Catherine for having some confidence on us, organizing this and making these two events happening the same week on the same place and having these common events. Thank you very much, and thank you also for your support on the organization. And also welcome to the general public, because we also opened some free tickets for everyone that wanted to benefit from the different events that are happening this week. So welcome to all of you in France, in Rennes, and here on the University of Rennes, the campus of Beaulieu, and more specifically in this room, Le Diapason, which is our spectacular room here at the University of Rennes. And as you can see, it's an amazing setup that we can benefit from the university. So I will try to be super quick. But just because we have different audiences in this room, just 1 minute about the topic of ICT for sustainability. So it's everything regarding the cross-fertilization of digitalization and sustainability. So looking at all the research work that are done in between these two areas, so sustainability for the digitalization, but also how we can make more sustainable our world thanks to IT. So we are really looking at ICT as part of the problem, but also possibly as part of the solution, and that's what we are discussing during our conference, ICT for Sustainability. So here it's a word cloud that I extracted from all the titles of the papers and keynotes and workshops that will be presented during this week, and then I try to extract some more high-level topics that will be discussed over the week. And as you can see, it's really split in between making more sustainable our digitalization of the world, as you can see on the left of the slide, but also how we can use ICT for making more sustainable a certain number of phenomena. So ICT for us is an international conference. This is a premier venue on the topic of ICT and sustainability. As an international conference, it's organized every year in a different country. That's the first time that the conference is happening in France, and we are super happy to welcome it in Rennes. This conference is primarily a research conference or an academic conference where all the researchers are getting together for presenting and sharing the last research results. But there is also a very important point about this conference, is that we try to cross boundaries. Of course, we cross the boundaries into the academic community, because we have different scientific communities that are put together from the different area of computer science, working together on this topic of sustainability. But we are also crossing the boundaries of the communities in our society. It's not only researchers, but we also try to organize a lot of co-located events where we can bring together not only researchers, but also industrial partners, decision and policy makers, artists, students, and more generally the general public. And today, this morning, this keynote is part of this ambition of putting together different kind of audiences. So I'm really happy to see all of you in this room, and I hope we have a lot of exchanges in between these different communities. So in practice, for 2023, we decided to really highlight this with two different programs. The research program, where we are really discussing the last result in our research community, where we can see mostly researchers, but a lot of industrial partners as well. And we also organize what we call the OFF program. So the OFF program is a set of collocated events with different formats, so keynotes, but also other kind of events that will be presented later on, and where we try to bring together these different audiences. So, as I said, it's the first edition of the conference in France, here in Rennes. It's a full week dedicated to sustainability and ICT, with a very varied and rich program with very different kind of events and different formats of these events. Mostly hosted here at the University of Rennes and on the campus of Beaulieu. The research program is mostly happening in our lab, and the OFF program is mostly happening here at the Diapason, which is 200 meters in between. The conference has been organized by Gunther Musbeißer and myself as general co-chairs, but also I should thank Anne-Cécile Orgerie as a conference chair, who take care of most of the practicalities and logistics and driving the local committee. But of course, that's the faces that you probably have seen the most during this organization. But in practice, everything happened in the back, and the one that really did the work is a complete set of people dedicated to the organization of this conference, starting by the organizing committee that took care of the scientific program. So I would like for all the members of the organizing committees that are attending this morning maybe to stand up. Who is part from the standing committee? Thank you very much. So they took care of the scientific organization, but also there is a lot of logistics, a lot of events in different places with different audiences. That was really new also for us. And everything has been taken in charge by the local committee. I don't know how many people from the local committee is there, because they are always in the back making sure that everything is correctly happening. But for the ones that are here, I would like to ask you to stand up. And in any case, I would like to ask you to have a very big applause for them. Thank you very much. We are this morning at Le Diapason in this amazing room, and since now 1 year, we are working very closely with the team of Le Diapason. To be honest, it's more than 15 years that I'm at the University of Rennes. That was my first opportunity to work with them, and they are just amazing. We are really lucky to have you guys. And everything which is going to happen here at the Diapason is really due to them. So I would like also to ask you to give a very big applause to all the team of the Diapason. Thank you very much. Last but not least, and it's probably the most important one for the future. You have seen many people helping us during the day yesterday, and you will see them over all the week, making sure that everything that is supposed to happen is actually happening. And this is really due to the student volunteers, part that are local, and the other part coming from abroad. We met 2 days ago, and are already fully devoted to the organization of this conference and making sure that everything is happening smoothly. I put all the names here because they are probably the new generation, the most important one for the future. And I really would like to ask you to give a very big applause to all our student volunteers. Thank you very much, guys. Finally, and that will be my last slide for my part, nothing could have happened without our sponsors, especially because in addition to the research program, we have the off programs that we needed to support, including financially. So I really would like to thank all our sponsors, especially the Eclipse Foundation, an open source foundation that supported us from day one as a platinum sponsor. So thank you very much for the Eclipse Foundation. But I also like to thank Zenica, Broadpeak, Keolis, Orange, Le Pool, and Le Collectif Numérique Responsable. All of them has been really responsive when I solicited them in the past. So thank you very much for your support. Last but not least, we have a lot of institutional sponsors. More specifically, the conference has been organized by our computer science lab, which is called ERISA. And the conference has been supported administratively by the CNRS. CNRS is a National Research Institute in France. And of course, the conference is hosted by the University of Rennes. So I really would like to thank these three institutions that provided a very strong support on the organization of this conference, especially with regard to the topic. They really provided a very, very strong support. So thank you very much for supporting this conference happening today. And for this, I would like to invite first our brand new Vice President for Research at the University of Rennes. We had some new election 2 weeks ago now. And Muriel is our new Vice President of Research, and she accepted to give some words this morning. So thank you very much, Muriel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benoit. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear colleagues, so on behalf of the President of the University, I would like also to welcome you here in Rennes at the University of Rennes, and also of one of the campuses, and here in Beaulieu, so because you have roughly 7 campuses, so it's a lot of things to do. So Beaulieu is more dedicated to science and, for example, physics, digital science, but also, for example, chemistry, biology, mechanics, and so on. So for us, it's really a great pleasure, for example, to host the 9th International Conference on Information and Communication Technology for Sustainability to promote innovative research for the benefit of the society, which is recognized at the international level, but is also very strategic for our university. And Benoit mentioned that we had elections, but we had elections for a specific reason, because we granted a new university this year in 2023, and this new university involves, for example, 6 faculties, and you have, for example, the Faculty of Science, Health, Economic and Management, Law, Political Science, Philosophy, Technology, and Engineering. But also, we now involve 5 engineer schools. And for example, we have the school dedicated to public health, École des hautes études en santé publique. We have also a school dedicated to chemistry with l'École nationale de chimie de Rennes. We have a school involved also in applied science, which is INSA, and we have also a school dedicated to public administration, Sciences Po, and finally dedicated to excellence in research and teaching, l'École normale supérieure. So we are working all together here to build a new future for our university. And this future involves, for example, 37,000 students, and among them we have roughly 3,000 international students. Having said that, the university is also a very important hub for research. And this is really a major center for disciplinary research because many of our fields are recognized at the international level and in different ranking. To name but a few, for example, mathematics, chemistry, ecology, physics, computing science, for example, or telecommunication engineering are among the top 100, 200 in Shanghai ranking. The university is already also supporting interdisciplinary research and co-constructed projects, especially in the frame, for example, of environmental transition. And for example, last year we have been awarded the Excellence Project dealing about the environmental transition, which brings together several people, several fields together dealing with this transition. So this means it goes from ecology, for example, to chemistry, physics, economy, and for example, law, but also digital science are involved in the co-construction of this project and try to answer to specific problems of our society. And so, for example, the first call to develop this interdisciplinary project will be open, for example, this autumn. So you can see that the problems dealing with the environmental transition is something which is very important for our university and will help us also to develop very high-level research. So this meeting, for example, for us is something very important and is very strategic because when I had a look at your program, I could see that the program is very varied and very rich and cross-fertilize really different communities, academia, industry, policymakers, and so on. And this is really deals about this environmental transition. Also, when I have a look also at the keynote speaker, and your next keynote speaker, Professor Fairbuth, also really shows the link between the digital and the energy transition, which is a really important aspect also for the environmental transition. And also on Thursday, you will have Jean Jouzel, for example, which is also dealing with the environmental transition, but more in the higher education. And he will show you how to integrate sustainability in higher education. So really, you address very important topic, and I think this is very strategic after all for our university. As Benoit said also, I would like to thank several people. I would like to thank the chairs of this meeting, to organize this meeting here at the University of Rennes. I would like also to thank the IRISA for the organization of this meeting, and the Diapason and the Deal, which help for the organization of this meeting. And I would like finally also to thank you for attending this conference, and I hope that you will have a rewarding week of intellectual exchange and networking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Muriel. Next, I would like to give the mic to Olivier Serre as the Deputy Scientific Director at the CNRS. Thank you very much for coming this morning for introducing.
Thanks a lot. It's a real pleasure to be here today for the opening of this 9th edition of ICT4S, and especially as it is the first time that it takes place in France. So as a representative of the CNRS, which, as you said, Benoit, is the largest research organization in France, I'm very proud that members of our laboratories are organizing such an event. For the CNRS, and especially for its computer science department, sustainability is a priority theme, which we really try to support. And we do this through permanent research position, project funding, scientific events, and more generally by trying really to strongly affirmate that our institutional support through our overall scientific policy. That said, it would be a true lie to assert that the importance of this thematic did not emerge from the grassroots. For over 15 years, approximately at least, colleagues, many of them are actually in this room, have been working really to shape, to structure, and to drive this research. So first, I'm of course thinking of the so-called GDS EcoInfo, but also of several GDR. So this is very specific French stuff, but GDR are tools led by CNRS that are meant to animate and structure scientific communities. So each of them has a specific topic, and several of them are really pushing strongly on this topic of sustainability. There I'm thinking of the GDR RSD that is working on networks and distributed systems, the GDR MADIX working on data science and management of this data, GDR Aero on operation research, GDR SOC2 on system of chips, and of course GDR GPL on software science that is this week co-locating is its annual conference with ICT4S. So I will keep it short. Thanks again for attending. Huge thanks to the organizers. I'm thinking of Benoit and Cécile and many other and all the colleagues of ERISA. And yes, a big thanks for them and also for you to be here today.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Sandrine Blasi as the Deputy Director of our Computer Science Lab here in Rennes. She will probably say this, but it's one of the largest lab in France on computer science, and we got the very strong support from day one from the lab. So I would like to thank also Sandrine before giving you the mic for all the support. And now, please.
On behalf of the ERISA laboratory, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the ICT4S conference and to the National Days of the GDR-GPL here in Rennes. The ERISA laboratory brings together 9 institutions and a few partners. ERISA is composed of more than 900 scientists covering almost all fields of computer science and information technologies. The 2 conferences address important research topics, and several teams at ERISA are committed to these issues. The concomitance of the 2 conferences creates a unique opportunity for collaborations and knowledge exchange. We are also delighted to welcome renowned speakers who will share their expertise. And lastly, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the local chairs, Olivier Barret, Jamel Keladi, Benoit Commal, and Anne-Cécile Orgerie, and to all the members of the organizing team who have devoted countless hours to prepare these conferences. Their dedication has made this remarkable event possible. So I wish you all an inspiring and fruitful week ahead, filled with discoveries, collaboration, and a lot of fun here in Rennes. Thank you for your presence and commitment.
Okay, now I propose to move on the actual content, because we discussed about this ICT4S conference, but we still don't know what will actually happen. So I will give the mic to Gunther Musbacher, also general co-chair of the conference, for presenting the actual events that will happen during this week.
Okay, I will be very brief. I first will introduce the OFF program. This is the first event that's part of the OFF program. Actually, we had an event yesterday already. It's a rich, varied program. We have approximately 400 attendees, and we're trying to bring together researchers, government and industry representatives, decision and policymakers, artists, students, and the general public. So yesterday we have a debate, we have a quiz planned, a panel. There's 2 keynotes, part of the off program, as well as artist performances, both on Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening, and also Thursday during the day. With that, I'll hand over the mic to Birgit Benschenstadler to introduce the research program.
Good morning, everybody. Are you as excited as I am to be here? I mean, I got a case of the happy wiggles, and that always happens when Ty is standing next to me, Thais is standing next to me, but also when there is a bunch of really good people around who very much care about what they're doing. So we had the pleasure to put together the research program for this conference.
Yes, we have a keynote talk by Annie Catherine Peters. We have the presentation of 24 papers accepted of the conference among the 56 submit paper. We have also some awards for authors and also for the reviewers. And we have 7 workshops, a doctoral symposium, and demonstrations and posters.
And to look into the content, tiny preview. So we've categorized it into 5 topic areas. ICT for us, buy-in for society. We couldn't agree on a preposition, therefore we put them all there. There's a lot about energy efficiency. We have a few impact cases for the Sustainable Development Goals. We talk a bit about life cycle analysis and some reviews of those studies, and about business case studies. Now, the next session, right after the keynote here, talks about untangling degrowth in ICT, which, by the way, does not mean throwing away all that hardware and living in the mountains and never using technology again. What does it mean? I think you might have to come to the session. Same about the obsolescence parts, like what do you do with all that hardware that you're hiding in that bottom drawer? Always on, is that necessary? I figured out that my favorite button on the phone is the airplane mode. It's great. And last but not least, do you know the planetary boundaries? Who of you knows the planetary boundaries? Okay, perfect. The other 30% of you, you got some homework. I'm going to quiz you tonight at the reception. Nah, just kidding. Just come to the presentations, you will find out. And I think we have to move on, otherwise I could do some stand-up on all these other ones. But for stand-up, we have Daniel Parkman, who did a fabulous job last night. So thanks so much for coming here.
In addition to the OFF program and the academic research program, we also have a social program with a City Hall reception yesterday. We have a conference reception tonight, and then the gala on Thursday. We also have activity program with running and jogging sessions Wednesday and Friday morning, and a yoga session on Thursday. The overall program is available on our website, where you find all the information. In blue, you see the academic program. In dark blue is the social events, and the green program is the OFF program that's shared with the other communities that Benoit mentioned earlier. The conference is located at the Berleux campus, at the RISA and the Diapason buildings, accessible by metro and bus lines quite easily from the center of Rennes. Just a couple of conference logistical announcements. If you have any questions, ask someone with a purple badge. Those are very helpful student volunteers that will direct you to the right answers. We have bus and metro tickets available at the registration desk. If you have a need for them, please come and pick them up. New this year as well, we introduced a sustainability chair as part of the organizing program, and we also recorded our decisions and discussions on how to run a sustainable conference at a dedicated webpage that's then also available for future conferences to build on that. I'd also like to point you to the code of conduct. We are striving to be an inclusive, safe, and professional conference. And as you've already seen, you will receive nightly emails about the program of the following days to keep you up to date on what's going to happen. Last but not least, for the reception tonight, you have received food and drink tickets, as well as for the food trucks tomorrow. If you don't need them, please return them to the registration desk. For the gala on Thursday, there is a dietary restriction ticket. Please make sure to bring that so that you can indicate to the staff that you would like to have the dedicated meal. Last but not least, the lunches are held here at Le Diapason, and the academic program before and after is held at the ERISA lab. So please, we encourage you to not spend too much time after the session discussing, but rather discuss on the way to lunch and make your way down here to the Diapason. With that, I'll hand over the mic to Anne-Cécile, who will introduce the keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we will have the start of this conference, a real start, the scientific part. And so it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker. So Hugues Verboeuf has held several positions at France Télécom, Orange Group, and the British Telecom Group. He then got specialized in the management of transition, so energy, digital, generational, and he joined the SHIFT project. So the SHIFT project is a French non-profit organization which was created in 2010, and it aims to limit both climate change and the dependency of our economy on fossil fuels. So Hugues steers the Lean ICT project that was launched in 2017, and you might have read their reports. And so this project is at the crossroads between digital and energy transition. And today, he will speak about sustainable digitalization and why we need to shift away from big tech business models. So Hugues, the floor is yours.
Là où les atteignants s'éteignirent. Maybe. Wow. I'm impressed. It works. Okay. Good morning. So I will try to explain in the next 45 minutes my true belief, which is that we need to shift away from current business models that work within the ICT industry, and especially as far as big tech companies are concerned. And actually, I didn't know that when preparing the presentation, but the first paper that is going to be presented at 11 o'clock, if I understand, is about the relationship between ICT and the growth, which is the another way to try to entangle the relationship between ICT and growth. And the question is, how can we make sure we still have growth and it becomes sustainable? Or should we redefine growth? Or should we redefine business models which create value? Or should we redefine what is value? So, thanks for the presentation, Anne-Cécile. And by the way, I'm sorry, but I'm not a professor, so I don't want there to be any ambiguity. So everything I'm going to explain is driven by what I've been doing in the past 6 years, actually. Yes, working. So after having spent 30 years in the digital industry, I joined the SHIFT project in 2017, and this led to a first report, which the English title is Towards Digital Sobriety, which means, in other words, there is no way to make ICT sustainable if we don't find a way to use it in a more sober way and with sufficiency in mind rather than sheer abundance. So I'm not going to quote all of these reports, but something important happened in 2020. This project, Digitalization for Sustainability, Science in Dialogue, which is a transdisciplinary European research project, and I was lucky enough to be part of it with another 12 experts coming from different fields, and actually we have at least 2 other experts who took part in that. Lawrence Hilty, maybe Lawrence, would you stand up? I think you're already famous, but still. And Matthias also was part of that. I don't know if Matthias is here today. Yes, here. And I think the 2 of them will agree that it was a fantastic experience, also conducted in the COVID times, which meant that it took us about 18 months to find a way to physically meet after having started the project. The reason why I'm spending some time on presenting these reports is that the conclusion of the work we did in 2 years is in a report which was published in October last year, and the title of the report is Digital Reset, which means that our conclusion is that to make sure that digitalization is going to play for sustainability, we need to fundamentally revisit the way the digital industry is working and the way we use digital in our daily life. And in the course of this project, we focused on different themes, and the one which came up to my mind after a few months of common work was the fact that we should explore a little bit more in depth the impact of the current business models at work within the digital industry, and especially the ones of the dominant players, which we call at the moment the big tech. I think everybody knows who is behind this name, and I think everybody knows also that they are actually driving the digital industry at the moment. So that's one of the reasons why I chose to investigate whether we could identify a relatively clear relationship between the logics behind the current business models and the current trend which is at work in the digital sector, which means growing energy consumption and growing GHG emissions. So what I will try to do is to explain the context, and I started already what was the thinking process which led me to explore this subject. The fact that I think probably a good part of the people around this room already know, which is the fact that at the moment the struggle between energy efficiency gains brought by technological progress and inflation of digital volume results in growing energy consumption. And then I will try to explain what is behind this growth of digital affluence, and especially the responsibility of the big tech business models. Big tech models which are not only, let's say, unsustainable intrinsically, but because of the market dominance of these big tech players, are actually driving the unsustainability of the digital industry. And then I will finish by sharing a few ideas about the way forward and how we change things. Of course, it's going to be a very short summary of a paper that was published and that you can find on this page together with other papers that were realized during the D4S project. So we can discuss about figures, but the fact that the carbon footprint of the ICT sector is growing, I think, is not disputed anymore. The fact that it is growing too fast either, and the fact that it is becoming a problem is recognized. And actually, as we are in France, I can even say that it has been recognized in a law that was adopted at the end of 2021, whose title is the Law for the Reduction of the Environmental Footprint of Digital in France. Okay. So I don't want to insist on these figures. They could be different, but at the moment it's clear that the carbon footprint of digital is already significant and that it's growing and it is not going into the right direction. So why is that? The problem is that neither inside the sector, neither in terms of interacting with other sectors, there is no proof at the moment that there has been a positive impact of digitalization in terms of decoupling growth, economic growth, and energy. There is a number of papers that were published. I'm just quoting one of them. At the moment, we have not found the recipe, I would say, to make sure that more digitalization is going to enable both more growth and less environmental footprint. And I mentioned already the fact that in the context of this D4S project, we came to this conclusion that there needs to be a fundamental redirection of the purpose, and the words are important, of digital technologies for the deep sustainability transformation. And of course, it's not only about business models, and there is a number of new principles that should be, let's say, adopted by not only by the digital industry, but by everybody using digital, if we want digital to play a positive part. So, if you have not done it, of course, I will direct you to this report, and it will give you a complete picture of what we mean by that, and especially these types of principles which are not only about environment, they're also about equity, sovereignty. But in terms of environmental interactions, it's clear that we need to think not only in terms of efficiency, and I know there's still a lot of workshops and papers about that, and it's quite necessary. But we need to couple that with other principles such as sufficiency and circularity, and we need to think in terms of systems. Personally, I think there is a great lack of research about system innovation, and not only service, product, or technical innovation. And even that, we need to come up with a new design, actually, of the society in which we want to live. A new design of the production modes, a new design of the consumption modes, and a new design that will define new ways of life. Okay. So, and at the moment, and that was very well described by David Ball and Thibaut Pierson. Is Thibaut here? From the Louvain University, in a paper in 2021, you see that the current increase of carbon footprint of the digital sector is a result actually of two adverse effects. A very huge improvement in terms of energy intensity of technology, which means a reduction of energy intensity or an increase of energy efficiency, depending on how you want to call it. And you have an example here on the left, and it's not meant, but I think it's, I took that from one of your papers, actually, Lawrence. But it's clear that we've been able to, every year, to produce, let's say, new processes that are able to process much more computing instructions, but they still consume about the same amount of energy. Okay, and in a couple of years, we've been able to have a difference of an order of magnitude between two generations of processor. However, it's clear that this is slowing down a little bit in the past few years, but it's still very present, and it's still very large, and it's still, if you compare digital with other sectors, the gains in terms of energy efficiency are much, much, much larger than in any other sector. Okay. And despite that, both the energy consumption and the carbon footprint is growing, but just because what is called here technology effluence, that means we could call that also technology intensity, actually. The degree of presence of digital in our daily life is increasing so much in the form of new devices, newer devices, because we're replacing them very often, and data, more data, and more and more and more and more data every day, and so quickly that we don't realize anymore that it's growing so much. But the net result is that. Okay. And of course, there is this famous rebound effect in the center of the process. I'm not sure there are some papers on the rebounds in this session, but there has been in the past. Many reasons behind the rebound effects. However, we should be aware that rebound effects have been first identified by economists, and these rebound effects are also at the core of some business models, which means that they're actually exploited by companies in order for us to consume more products and to consume more services in order to generate more revenue and more shareholder value. Okay? That's the game which has been played in the past years and the past 10, 20, 50, 100 years. Okay. Oops. And actually, this effect, and it's another paper from David and Thibault, you can find that in the different components of the ICT sector, but each time you have huge gains in terms of energy efficiency here, but you have actually larger increases of digital reference, or what I call digital volumes. And that's another way to describe that. I think as we are in this sector, we don't realize that it's actually very peculiar. It's very specific compared to other sectors. And we already have about 20 billion digital devices at work in the world. And if everything goes according to plans, according to industry plans, we are likely to have at least twice as many in 10 years. Okay. If we look at the traffic, it can vary across different geographies, but typically the growth rates are between 30 and 60% a year, okay, which are growth rates which are unknown in any other industry. And if we focus on the production of digital devices, again, if everything goes according to plans, remember we have 20 billion digital devices at work. We may produce another 70 billion new digital devices in the next 10 years. Okay. And of course, in order to produce these digital devices, we must come up with new ideas of digital uses. And IoT is a way to enable these new usages. VR headsets are another way. Apple just presented its own headset yesterday. And I think soon we'll hear again about the metaverse, even though some people think it's an old idea. So, I think there is nothing original in what I've been presenting in the last 15, 20 minutes. I'm sorry for those of you who are already experts in the field, but that's not the case of another part of the room. But, and I'm slowly coming to my point, and that was really part of the discussion in the D4S project. We should really think in terms of systems when looking at what is happening. I mean, not only in terms of products and services and unitary energy efficiency factors. We should be aware that actually the current energy or carbon footprint that can be attributed to digital is a result actually of interactions between different types of players. And these players are actually part of a system. And this system is, let's say, has its own dynamics. And at the moment, the dynamics are very much pushed by the offering, and especially by the big tech. It's clear, however, that everything that happens across these different players actually happens also is allowed by a number of rules and governance principles that have been set by regulatory and political authorities. Which means, and that's not the purpose of this speech, but if we want the system to behave differently, we have to find ways, we have to find levers to make sure that the production patterns or the consumption patterns are going to move, to shift to something which is more sustainable. And probably this won't happen if we don't change certain regulations and rules. And that's the job of public authorities. And even more fundamentally, this gets back to a higher degree of, let's say, thinking about society, and what is a set of beliefs and what is a set of values that we have in mind when we do things, and especially when we favor certain services compared to others. So the summary, and that's let's say basically what the SHIFT project has in mind when it conducts its work. That's the five things we have in mind. We have, I mean, basically everybody, at least in a large part of the world, is a digital consumer, and basically. Most of them are completely unaware of the environmental impact or the ethical impacts, by the way, of some of the digital usages they have. So if we want to change things, we have to find ways to make them aware, especially if we live in democratic societies where people should decide what the world should look like. It's a little bit the same with corporate users, although there is some movement because of the fact that, especially in the service industry, digital information systems can represent 40 to 50% of the total carbon footprint of the company. And as step by step, these companies must reduce their total carbon footprint to preserve their shareholder value and to preserve their resiliency, they start acting on it. Public authorities are sometimes aware of it, sometimes forget about it, but most probably fear that if they act too much on the sustainability lever, they will impede not only the economic growth of the ICT sector, but they might also impede the overall economic growth because there is a belief that ICT is one of the major levers for the other sectors to continue growing. Then there is this famous software-induced obsolescence. I will not talk about it because Lawrence is here. But a lot of the hardware obsolescence is caused by software. And then, last but not least, and that's the purpose of the few minutes that remain of the speech, the big tech business models who need actually to foster the type of digital affluent growth that we have seen in the past 10 years. And I will try to explain why. So, the first thing we should have in mind is that these big tech are extremely dominant in the market. First, there are financial superpowers. Okay, that's figures from 2020. It decreased in 2022, but it's going up again in the past few months. So these big tech companies are financial superpowers, and with financial superpower comes also a lot of other superpowers, such as influence over decision makers. That means they can also actually drive the rest of the digital market, because virtually they could choose to invest in any subsector and in a few years become number one or number two, because they are so rich, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of technology. So the result is that in the past 10 years, they have been overpowering the rest of the ICT sector. And here you have actually the growth rates of the revenue. And you see that the big tech category is clearly in another league than the rest of the sector. And I could show you a similar picture, which would be even more striking in terms of the evolution of market capitalization. And another way to look at it is if we look at the traffic which is carried by the internet network. In 2021, about 57% of the traffic was generated by 6 companies. 57%. And actually, getting back to 2017, 2018, I calculated that 75% of the growth which took place between 2018 and 2021 has been caused by these 6 same companies. So when I say they are driving the market, I think it's a proof which is sufficient enough. And actually, even in terms of new devices such as smart speakers, you can see that they also have the largest market shares. And that's probably that will happen also in terms of virtual reality headsets. And what will come next? I don't know yet what, but something will come next, and they will be behind it. Okay? So, there clearly, when you do strategy, studies, you learn that you can choose actually to imitate the market leader, or you can choose to be the one who drives the market. Okay, and that's clear. They have chosen to drive the market, and they have the resources to do it. So, why is it a problem? Because if their business models were, let's say, such that it would cause more positive effects than negative effects. That would be nice. But unfortunately, it's not the case. And it's not the case. One of the reasons is the following. That's in a very sketchy way the business models of a platform. Actually, they attract for free billions of users. Because there are billions of users, hundreds and thousands of content providers want to be on the platform to supply their services. And because there are billions of people who are using certain types of services on this platform, let's say millions of companies are willing to pay a lot of money to have some way of access to these billions of users. Okay. And basically, this is what the economists call a multi-sided platform, MSPs. Okay. They are actually generating their revenue from one side of the market by leveraging the other side of the market, delivering a free service to this side of the market. Okay. So, big tech are multi-sided platforms. And actually, what is a major source of revenue? Major source of revenue is advertisement. They do not necessarily resell individual data, but they resell techniques and content to third parties that will make them able to access a certain part of their users in a very efficient way. It's called micro-marketing, actually. So, their game, the way they are capturing value here, is depending on their ability to attract as many users as possible on their platform and to maximize what they call user engagement. So what is called user engagement? There is no clear definition, but basically, that's a user which is coming, let's say, 10 times a day to your platform is going to be much more engaged than a user which is coming once a month. Okay. A user which is going to use several types of services on your platform is going to be much more engaged than a user which comes only for a specific thing. A user who is going to spend maybe 1 hour on your platform is going to be much more engaged than a user which comes only for 2 minutes. Why? Because with user engagement comes the ability to detect behaviors and to enrich actually the knowledge about the users, and therefore to enrich, to increase the value that you can then sell to the companies that are willing to advertise. And so, what is the game there? The game is to make sure that you attract as many users as possible and they are as engaged as possible. And how they do that? Well, they do that by using a number of techniques, such as addictive design techniques, autoplay, for instance. And they are actually considering data as a production factor. They are going to continuously enrich, actually, the services they provide for free to their users. Okay, either the ones they generate by themselves or the one which is generated again freely by third parties. And at the moment, what does it mean? That means there is more and more video on all these platforms. And video streaming, I read that in the last Sendvide report, at the moment represents 75% of the traffic on mobile networks. 75%. So, in a way, what they do and what they need to do is to continuously enhance actually the interfaces they provide to these users to maximize the numbers and the engagement. And the good thing is that a part of the cost which is needed to constitute this digital reference is zero. Okay? Zero because it's provided by these other third parties who are very honored to be present on the platform. And the consequence is what? The consequence is that, of course, that's the example of Google and Meta between 2015 and 2020. And you have there both energy consumption, revenue, and average market capitalization. You see there is a very strong correlation between these three things. That's the first conclusion. And the other conclusion, which is more surprising, is that the revenue energy intensity is growing. That means each year they need to consume more energy to deliver an additional dollar of revenue. Okay? It's very peculiar because basically all the other sectors in the economy are reducing their energy revenue intensity. Okay? At the moment, and the consequence of that is that it's not there on the slide, but the whole ICT sector at the moment is going on the same trend, which means there is a growth of the revenue energy intensity. Okay? And it's completely the consequence of the game that this type of players is playing. And these are calculated numbers because I haven't found any source which is going to tell me what is the exact traffic going to Facebook or going to Google and what is the growth rate of this traffic. But let's say these numbers are likely. And as you see, they are much higher than the average growth of the internet traffic, which is in the range of 30%. Ericsson says 29%, others says 34%, but it's in the range of 30%. Okay. And here you have 60%, 42%. So clearly there are, and I could present, if they were as transparent, similar figures with Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. Okay. So what is happening is that because of their market dominance, because of the fact that they are generating 75% of the growth, they are actually probably the main inflation factor behind the growth of the internet traffic. Okay? And why? Because of the business model they have, they need to have continuously this type of traffic increase. So that's the first conclusion. Second conclusion is coming from the strategies they have announced now 2 or 3 years ago, which is, but yes, we are very big and we're getting bigger, but it's not a problem because either we are already carbon neutral or we are going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Okay. So, is it true? And what is the consequence? I guess you are all familiar with this fact, that is GHG protocol, and the fact that if you want to measure sustainability, how much sustainable is a company, you should do it across the whole value chain this company is responsible of. Okay, and not only on the scope 1 direct emission coming from using fossil energy, or scope 2, which is basically electricity consumption. But you should also take into account upstream scope 3, which means what they are paying, and also downstream scope 3, which means what is happening when people actually use the services or the products they sell. So, bear with me. There will be a lot of figures in the next 2 slides. But again, you will be able to check that in the paper which is online. Okay. I tried to understand whether their so-called carbon neutral strategies were valid, both for them, but also what it meant for the rest of the sector. Okay. So I started from the latest study made by the Shift project. I prolongated the trends towards 2030. And I made some simplifications, such as considering that all hyperscale data centers are owned by big tech, and that all big tech data centers are hyperscale data centers, which is a simplification, but it's not so far from the reality. And then I took into account let's say, the trends that we think are at work in the sector. And the fact that, obviously, these hyperscale data centers, so let's say these big tech data centers, are gradually taking a bigger share of the overall workload which is processed and executed in the overall data center place. Okay? And then I tried to understand what was the consequence in terms of both GHG emissions and electricity consumptions for the different components of the networks and making the additional simplification that from the big tech perspective, scope 1 and scope 2 would be the data centers, and the value chain would be their data centers plus the share of the network and the share of the devices that, let's say, are there because they are big tech. And what is the result? The result is that actually, if they do what they say they will do, which means basically making sure that all their data centers are going to be powered by green electricity, either with PPA or by putting their own electricity production plants on their campuses, powered by green energy. Actually, whereas despite the fact that the consumption of their data centers is likely to explode in 10 years, in the range of plus 400%, they would still be able to divide by half their carbon footprint, which means that they would be in line with a net zero trajectory according, for instance, the SBTi standard. So, they don't lie when they say that they are becoming carbon neutral by greening 100% of their electricity consumption. Okay? But the problem is that the rest of the value chain is not going to be able to do the same. and the electricity that is going to be used in the world, of course, its carbon intensity is going to be reduced step by step, but it's not going to be divided by half in 10 years, unfortunately. So if we take a reasonable scenario, actually, what will happen is that in parallel to this 50% reduction of scope 1, scope 2, actually, the overall value chain of the big tech will actually see their carbon footprint increase by 50% in the same amount of time. Okay? So that's why I say these carbon neutral strategies are misleading, because they are, in a way, justifying the fact that they can use so much energy. Okay. And beyond that, they perpetuate the myth of decoupling digital hypergrowth and carbon emission. And when I say the myth, it's a myth which is at work in a number of political bodies and in the minds of a number of political people. Okay, so that's why it's so dangerous, and that's why the solution to reduce carbon emissions is not only greening the electricity used by the big tech, but it's looking at the business models which are at work and understand how the digital industry can still work without this type of hypergrowth in terms of digital volume. So what is the way forward, according to us? Well, we have to move away for these business models which rely on audience monetization. And we can, and there are actually, other types of multi-sided platforms which do not work on the same principles. For instance, they can work on subscription-based principles. You can have some platforms where actually users get to the platform that they're actually willing that their personal data are shared with the other participants in the platform because they come to the platform for a specific subject. Okay? And that would be a type of cooperative platform, either in the form of new digital platforms working on this type of logics, or also platformization of existing cooperatives. And by the way, in Europe, we have more than 200,000 cooperatives, which represent a significant part of the economy, and which could evolve, the digitization of these cooperatives is an important challenge, actually. But there is very little attention which is given to that. And of course, we could also imagine public platforms, and to a certain extent, for instance, search engines could be considered today as commons, and we could consider they should be provided in a public way. So, and that's going to be the conclusion. It's not going to happen just because I say it should happen. It's clear that there is too much money at stake in this game. There is a lot of powerful forces that are not willing the rules of the games to be changed. So the first thing to do is to make sure that these big tech become less powerful. So in a way, we have to make them smaller. And actually, it has started a little bit in Europe with DMA, DSA, Digital Act, and so on. It should continue with some antitrust measures, and maybe there are some regulatory authorities in the US which think about that. But we need that, because if we don't do that, we won't, let's say, there won't be any room left for alternative players to ramp up and to grow. We are also made to make sure to discourage, let's say, companies that try to imitate this big tech, because if another big tech replaces a former big tech, we have not won a lot. We have to enforce, and it's a very powerful lever, scope-free carbon footprint measurement, and it's more and more the case in the international standards. It's the case since July 2022 in the mandatory reporting carbon footprint, which is required from large companies. Of course, we have to forbid the acquisition of personal data by default, and a lot of things gets back to what is or what is not in the current terms of reference, which are 50 pages or 100 pages, and nobody reads, but that by default makes this possible. Should not be the case. We have also to review, let's say, the technical architecture which are at work, and find a way to make sure that if they want, individual users can retain full control of their personal data. So discussion about Web3 or different interpretations of Web3. And last but not least, in parallel to these, we should also make sure that public policies support, including financially, alternative platforms in order to create actually a renewed digital sector, a renewed digital industry. And by the way, and that would be my conclusion, there is at the moment work conducted in France to review the national carbon strategy in the second part of this year, and we are going to do everything we can in order for debates to take place on the need to change the rules of the game, actually, in the digital sector, to enable and to allow all of this change to happen. Okay. And that was definitely the last slide. Again, for any details, please go to this page. And,
so thank you, Hugues, a lot for this really nice talk. So we have time for several questions. So I see one here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights. I'm Gazel Shakeri from the University of Oldenburg, and you had my attention the moment you said value change from the very beginning, right? So I love and agree with the idea of value change. However, I work in human-computer interaction, so I work on the user end of the spectrum. So now my question is, how do you have any suggestions how I could push forward this value change via user end, but also, apart from being a researcher, I'm a human with a social network as well. So do you have any suggestions how I could create this value change in my normal life as well? Thank you.
Oh, can I have 2 hours to answer the question? Of course, when I say there is a set of values, a lot of them are not specific to digital. For instance, at the moment, we value more abundance than sobriety. Okay, but it's not specific to digital. So, but on the other hand, there is a general consensus that in 10 years from now, um, digital is going to play even a higher role in our daily lives. So this issue of changing the values is really at the core of what needs to happen within the digital sector. So two things need to happen. I talked a lot about what needs to happen on the supplier side, okay, and especially the big tech. And by the way, if we manage to have this change happening at the big tech level, that will allow also some other industry players to transform themselves, which they can't do at the moment. On the demand side, I mean, people using digital services and so on, I think the first thing to do is information. It's very difficult for most people to understand and to know that when they use more or less the digital services, or when they buy more or less digital devices, they have an environmental impact. Okay? Whereas they know that when they use their car rather than taking their bicycle, they do have an environmental impact. Okay? So it's what I call actually improving the governance. And this improvement needs to happen at different levels. But the first level where it needs to happen is the individual level. And for it to happen, you need to have this information sharing process. That's why in France with Shift Project, we are trying to convince the government to launch some public information campaigns to make people realize that there are consequences of, for instance, visioning 4K video on your smartphone when you are in the metro rather than waiting to be at home and watching it via your fiber networks. That's one thing. Or the fact that by choosing to replacing your smartphone every 4 years rather than every 2 years, you're actually going to divide by half, actually, the carbon footprint of this smartphone ownership. Okay. So I think that's the first thing to happen. It's not enough. The rest is going also to depend on what's going to happen in other sectors. And basically, we need to forget about this abundance idea. I think even our president said that a few months ago. And he's not an Amish, by the way. So I think it's critical, but it's critical as well for digital and not only for clothes or for food.
Thank you. So we will have time for a few more questions, but I will just present the artist who drew this sketch. Is online, and he drew the sketch during the keynote. So it's Guillaume Meunier, and we will have also him for the other keynotes.
It's much shorter and probably better. So.
Hello, my name is Luis. I'm actually a PhD student with Telecom Paris. I saw that one of your slides, there was this mention of the big tech would have to stop using, not stop using, but reduce the use of user information to sell target advertising, and where the users would voluntarily upload their information. That's a great idea, but immediately I remembered a book from Shoshana Zuboff. The name is The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, in that book, which I recommend everybody who is looking this situation, she notices that this kind of change for the big tech are like an existential threat. I mean, if they can't do that, they face extinction. That's her way of putting it. So I think that whenever someone tries to move on that direction, there might be the time where they will flex its muscles, use all the power that they have to counter any attempt to do that. So what do you think would be a strategy to try to do what you propose, knowing that they are very powerful?
Oh yeah, but they have not waited for my speech to do that. Is the micro still on? Yeah, yeah. No, they have anticipated because I remember, I don't know, is Vlad Karama here? He was. Not here, but no, because we were together in a workshop, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago in Brussels. It was about cloud energy efficiency. And in the room, there were about 50 people, and half of them were coming from the big tech. But strangely enough, the discussion that happened and the way what the Commission said or didn't say clearly started to give a direction. And some of these big tech representatives tried to sell some cheap arguments, but they were quickly backed off. And so what I mean is that, of course, these big tech are spending huge amounts of money to do lobbying. And they have been doing that for years. And they are going to try to stop any significant change in the regulations or in the laws that would make their lives more difficult. Okay. So, yes, so what? That's also happening in other sectors. And it's a matter of convincing enough people, and not only decision makers, also the rest of the society, that the change needs to happen. It needs to be planned so that any industry players has the time, actually, to transform itself and to still be in the game in a few years from now. Although the rules of the game will have changed a lot, and also the business models will have evolved a lot. So it's a matter of projecting itself in the future, giving this vision, and choosing to make progress in the direction that has been identified without too much hesitation.
Thank you. So I know there are other questions, but we are running out of time. But Hugues will be here up to the beginning, today. So you can ask him questions during the lunch break and the coffee break that will follow. Just one thing to conclude this session. So on behalf of the whole organizing committee, I'm really proud to give you a small gift. So and thank you again.
So that.
So now it's coffee break. So GDR, GPL, PNRB, and the others to the lab.